thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. We're here to talk about bringing generative AI into your security operations. I hope you find the content in this presentation useful. In putting these slides together, we tried to balance high-level practical insights, explanations, but also practical examples. So in the first part of this presentation, what we'll do is we'll cover off kind of what generative AI is, why it's taking the world by storm, and why we'll see it in all kinds of different applications as time goes on. And then we'll cover more of the technical insights of practical applications of applying generative AI inside of your processes inside of your SOC, and share any sort of insights that we've gleaned, and some of the tools and things that we're building, and ways to approach bringing generative AI to make measurable impacts inside of your security operations. So excited to share this content with you all. Hopefully you take a few things away from this, and look forward to the Q&A at the end of this session. So let's dive in. So just a really quick intro. My name is Jimmy Astle, and I lead the validation and data science efforts here at Red Canary. Prior to working full-time in the data science side of the house here at Red Canary, I led our threat research work here for about 2 years. And prior to joining Red Canary, I spent like 6-ish years at Carbon Black in their threat research org. I was working on their cloud sensors and next generation detection and response capabilities that were embedded inside of their sensor. And prior to that, I worked several years at MIT Lincoln Laboratory in an R&D capacity for the Cyber Systems Assessment Group, working on all the sort of national security problems that we have in cybersecurity. So definitely a long career in R&D. This is my first time applying, the long-term cybersecurity knowledge that I've gained throughout my career to data science. For folks that have, as an internal threat research dork like me, and are thinking about doing data science things, I encourage you to learn these technologies. They're going to be super important in your career. And we're only going to use more of it because, as you know, in cybersecurity, it's a big data problem. And having the tools and that knowledge and that know-how to sift through that data and find those needles in the haystack is super important. All right, so without further ado, let's dive in. So we're going to do a quick poll here to get the audience, to get some participation. And so, what I'm just asking is, have you used generative AI to solve a problem at work, right? And the reason I'm asking this is there is a paradigm shift going on right now as it relates to generative AI, right? And what do I mean by this? So outside of the hype with ChatGPT and the incredible sort of utility you get out of this tool, we have these general problem-solving machines, right? So take a second and think about that. General problem-solving machines encoded inside of software, right? With classic software development, you'd have to build, purpose-built software for specific, tasks that you wanted to do. And yeah, that there's different ways to design software to make it reusable, compostable, et cetera. But you still had to build this software for very specific tasks. And today, with these large language models, you can ask them anything, right? With the right context and the right prompting, you can get pretty accurate results out of them, right? So whether it's building grocery lists or helping you brainstorm on a document or a presentation or generating images, right? Like there's almost infinite possibilities of harnessing the power of generative AI and using it to enhance what you do, right? And so let's see what we got from a poll here. So 61% of the folks that have tuned in today have said that they've used generative AI to solve a problem at work, and about 38% have said no. And so for those folks that haven't tried it yet, I encourage you to dip your toes in the water. This is going to be like email. It's going to be one of those things that's not going away. It's an incredible tool for you to use. And for the folks that have used it, I look forward to some good questions and hopefully some learnings throughout this presentation. So let's orient ourselves a little bit before we dive into the nitty gritty. So what is generative artificial intelligence? If there's some data science nerds on the call, I'm going to very oversimplify this, but what generative AI is it's a branch of machine learning that generates something new, right? It is part of deep learning. It's using neural networks to predict text in the context of your input. But in its simplest sense, you put an input into these things, and it generates something and outputs it, right? So whether that's text or code, if you're a coder and you haven't used something like GitHub Copilot or an IDE that has generative AI built into it, I highly recommend you try it. It's magical. Once you start writing a few lines of code, it predicts the rest of it. You can use tools like DALL-E, right, to generate images, videos, right? It's pretty incredible with just some simple prompting what this artificial intelligence is able to generate. And so there's almost infinite possibilities and where we can apply this. But today, obviously, we'll be talking about security operations. And when you're using this technology, it almost seems like it's a brain, right? It learns based on your inputs. When you have conversations with it, it will learn over time how you speak to it. You can tell it how you want to reply. It's pretty incredible. And it has almost infinite amount of knowledge. Obviously, there's knowledge built into these models, but you can complement it with your own knowledge. And we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation. And I think one of the most interesting things with this technology, and if you haven't experimented with it, you should, is the multimodal aspects of it. And so what does that mean? So if I use the ChatGPT app on my phone and I take a picture of my dog and I ask it, what kind of dog is this? The models will analyze that image and then through words tell me, hey, your dog is a golden retriever because of its size and its color and its hair, right? And so what I've done is through multiple inputs, a picture, it is then analyzed that picture in words, told me, here's what I've seen. And I can also tell it with audio to speak it to me, and it will, right? And so it's pretty incredible what these models are able to do. But in that same vein, the generative AI is not intelligent yet. And I like to use the word yet because this technology is moving so fast. And at some point, right, maybe in this summer when GPT-5 comes out, it'll have even better intuition and creativity, and it'll blow us away with the possibilities. But right now, what generative AI is a system one thinker, right? Humans have two types of way of solving problems or thinking about things: system one and system two. System one is looking at the screen right now. I know that color is red. I don't have to think about it. I don't use any sort of chain of thought or reasoning or intuition. I just use my intuition to know that is red, right? And so all large language models to date are programmed to be system one thinkers. And so, they're order takers, they're not order givers. And you have to prompt them in certain ways to get with the right context and the right data to get accurate information out of them. And the other thing that's super important to call out here is the models are stochastic in nature, which means they're random. They're not deterministic like classical, predictive security or predictive machine learning. If you ask the same question 10 times, you're going to get 10 different answers. They might all evolve around the same type of answer, but it's not going to give you the same exact response word for word, right? And we'll get into reasons why that's actually not good in detecting threats with generative AI. And so the best way I like to explain using generative AI, think of it as like an extra muscle or an exoskeleton. We use it to speed people up. We don't use it to augment people in any way, right? And so because these models have so much data encoded in them, the information is, and access to information is so easily democratized now. It's so easy to get these answers really quickly. Where we see huge strengths in generative AI and its applications is its ability to take large volumes of data, sift through it, build tables, build charts, give you summaries, find interesting patterns in that data. It's able to do that very quickly and very cheap, right? Versus what a human's able to do. And if you prompt these correctly and you chain prompts together in correct ways with certain frameworks, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation, they're actually pretty darn good at following directions. I will tell you that they're stubborn, but they're still pretty good at following directions if you prompt them the right way and you give them the right data or access to the right tools. So we've kind of done a quick overview here. We've oriented ourselves on where generative AI fits into the artificial intelligence landscape. We've talked about some of the pros and cons and what generative AI is good at. And so now let's start to orient ourselves around using generative AI to increase our operational efficiencies inside of security operations centers, right? So this is a really high level overview of kind of the workflow inside of a SOC, right? I'll do a little bit of explaining here, and then we'll dig in. And so typically in a SOC, right, you have some sort of signal, some sort of tip off on suspicious behavior, malicious behavior, whatever it is, right? It comes through a set of systems that you have, and then you're going to triage that. You're going to investigate it. You're going to validate that your investigation and the outcomes of that investigation are in fact a true positive, false positive, whatever it is. Make sure you have a second set of eyes review that. And then finally, depending on the severity of the threat or where it is inside of your network, you're going to need to respond and remediate to that, right? So I thought I'd put this together to kind of give you just a so what of where we see generative AI helping in cybersecurity for security operations and where it's being a force multiplier today, right? And so right off the bat, like I was alluding to, you cannot use generative AI to classify threats solely, right? Meaning if I give generative AI an alert or a set of data and tell it, classify this as suspicious, malicious, unwanted, and it will and only spit out those answers. It'll do that, but I will almost guarantee you it's going to do that with a very low level of accuracy. It's very easy manipulated. Again, it's random in nature, and you should really stick to classical predictive security tools, as well as tried and true things like Yara, heuristics, that sort of stuff, right? So don't even try to use generative AI to do the predicting of threats. Maybe sometime in the future with fine-tuned models or models specifically built for security, we might see some utility there. But the models that are available to us, the general public today, either open source or closed source, are not good at detecting threats or predicting the threats as we would in the SOC experience it with other security tools. Validation. So when we talk about validation, this isn't in the sense of like, hey, here's a schema of data, and you give the AI that schema and you give it another piece of data and say, hey, does this data match this schema? Is there anything that's changed? That is not what I mean by validation. Actually, generative AI is really good at doing stuff like that. When I talk about validation here, I mean that we've detected a threat, we've triaged it, we've investigated it, and now we're ready to send that threat to, if we're Red Canary, to one of our customers. And we have a very high level of accuracy here in our security operations center. And so when we ship a threat or when we give a threat to a customer, we want to make sure with over 99% accuracy that is a true positive. And so we are not using generative AI at that step to validate whether, when that threat goes out the door, if it's actually a true positive or not. We rely on our people for that. And that is not somewhere that generative AI, at least right now, is going to be useful in helping you validate the true positive, false positive nature of a threat, very similar from the detections mindset. But all that being said, where do we see generative AI really helping? There's two big places. So triage and investigation. Like I was alluding to, generative AI, large language models specifically, can take in a ton of information and sift through that with really simple prompting and natural language. And you don't need to have a data science background and be an expert in things like pandas to make sense of it, right? You can feed all sorts of context. You can feed user logins. You can feed the alerts that go along with that. And you can ask generative AI to build a login baseline. You can ask it to make timelines and ASCII art, right? It's going to do all of that for you. And say you have a bunch of unstructured data and you just throw it at it and say, hey, make a table that helps me understand what's going on here. And it will just do that for you, right? And so it really is like your co-pilot in the SOC to help you investigate and visualize and inspect data in ways that traditionally, you would need to use data science tooling, Jupyter notebooks, and things like that to make sense of it. And then finally, the last place, and this is where we'll actually dig into in more detail in this presentation and have some real world examples, is response remediation. So I'm sure like most of you understand when response remediation in cybersecurity falls into it's a pretty cut and dry process, honestly. And depending on whether it comes from the network, the cloud, identity, or endpoint, you typically have a playbook that for the most part follows very similar structures, right? And so what we've found is some of these larger, more powerful foundational models like GPT-4 and even GPT 3.5 have really strong cybersecurity general knowledge baked right into them. And so with the right prompting and the right context, you're actually able to get highly accurate response and remediation playbooks out of these things very quickly. So when you have a threat that walks through a number of different items or touches a number of different places, you're able to feed that context to a model, ask it for help in certain ways, and it will spit out exactly what you're looking for with very high accuracy. And so what we'll do in this presentation is we'll kind of walk you through how we're using that today at Red Canary, and we'll walk you through a real world example of what that looks like. So before we dive into that, this is a slide that AWS has used in a presentation. I thought it was super helpful. And so I'm going to spend a minute here that, when you're thinking about using generative AI in your SOC and how to develop with it, there's certain architecture patterns that you need to follow, right? And I've been using the words prompt engineering, and so we'll start there. But on the X and Y axis, you see this sort of easy to complex with cost, low cost, and high cost, right? So when you're thinking about using these tools and how to use them, do not even try to go to the bottom of this. You can solve about 90+% of the problems you have in front of you with just really good contextual prompt engineering. And I would say it's 95+% of your problems with a combination of contextual prompt engineering and retrieval augmented generation. If RAG is a new concept to you, definitely write that down and go do some research on that. That is how you complement the baked-in knowledge, or you supplement the baked-in knowledge in a model with your own private data. And so you can essentially prompt a model, ask it a question, and in the background go retrieve other data and feed that to the model for context dynamically so that you get a more accurate response, right? And so between those two things, you can really accomplish a ton of different tasks inside a security operations center. And this is where we spend a lot of our time on developing tools, refining the retrieval, compressing data, cleaning data to present to the large language models for the most accurate answers possible. We'll spend a quick minute on fine tuning and training, but fine tuning actually doesn't expand the knowledge of a model. What you're doing is you're teaching it how you want it to respond and give answers. So you're essentially pre-baking question and answers, and you're training a model on how you want it to respond. It's a good way to shorten your prompts, and it's a good way to save costs over time once you've figured out a good workflow. And most folks will not want to train models. Only a few companies in the world have the resources in both cost, time, and compute to do that. And so I would not even start there. And so, in the spirit of being transparent and sharing some fun, generative AI know-how, I figured I would walk you through an example of contextual prompt engineering in the context of cybersecurity and SOC workflows, right? And so what you're seeing here is an example of alert summarization using GPT 3.5, and so as the foundational model. And so I'll give you a really quick background on what you're seeing here on the screen. So when you're prompting a model through an API, right? If you've used ChatGPT or Gemini, you dive right into a chat prompt, and you can start typing away. What we do is we actually use the backend APIs, through Azure, Microsoft Azure, to do a lot of that. And so what you need to do when you use these programmatically is you have to provide a system prompt. Think of that as like the foundational instructions and context and orders that you're going to give a large language model. So in this case, our system prompt goes a little bit like, hey, your role is a cybersecurity analyst. Your objective is to investigate and understand the context of security alerts and communicate your analysis clearly, right? You have a task and you have an output format. Always respond in Markdown. Provide abbreviated next steps to investigate. Always articulate your response in an unbiased format. These are techniques of prompting the large language model to give it the best possible chance of a zero-shot accurate answer. That means with no prior knowledge, I can give you an input and you will give me back a highly accurate answer. And so in this case, what we're asking the large language model to do is just parse through some raw JSON and give me a quick summary of what you see, right? And so at Red Canary, we take a lot of data from a lot of different sources and do a lot of transformations, right? But one thing that these models are good at from a cost-effective and speed perspective is chugging through these models and extracting entities and summarizing information, like I said previously. So at the top, you see a user prompt, and that's your input. That's if you're using ChatGPT, that's the chat box that you're chatting into. And so in this case, we're just putting the raw JSON of an AWS guard duty alert just right in there, unedited, unfiltered, just right in. And so with that user system prompt and that user prompt, we pass that to GPT 3.5, which is the foundational model, and it will do that inference in the cloud, and it will spit back a completion. And so you can see here, the completion says, summary, this alert was generated by guard duty, indicating that an EC2 instance is querying a black hole domain. And then it pulls out that forensics information so you can start investigating. And so this all happens programmatically via an API. It's done really quickly. And the most important thing, this costs tenths of a penny to execute, right? And so you can start to see that when you have these sort of practical SOC problems or data parsing, data analysis problems, these models are really good at just explaining things and giving you clear insights into what's going on. So this is a sort of end-to-end explanation of contextual prompt engineering. It's not super complicated, like I said, and it's just a few API calls using Python or your favorite programming language, and you're off to the races. But what happens when you start to take contextual prompt engineering and you chain the outputs of these prompts to feed other requests, right? And you give it access to tools to then go enrich IP addresses or enrich hashes or go search user logon information, right? Well, that is the concept of artificial intelligence agents, or AI agents. And so here at Red Canary, we're building a Red Canary Copilot agent ecosystem internally to help us automate those rote tasks, right? Those sort of mindless, click, click, click. It doesn't require intuition or creativity to do. And a lot of the times, you can do a lot of upfront work in a SOC so that when a human finally looks at something, a lot of that investigation is done already, right? And so what we've done is we've focused on an agent that can summarize threats, that can build response remediation actions, that can offer hardening advice, given a threat that we've observed and all of the indicators associated with that, and offer threat hunting guidance. And in some cases, even summarize threat hunting reports. And so it does all of that via a set of prompts and a set of chaining, and we give it tools. And so, for example, if we see an IP address in a threat, it will know that there's an IP address there, and it will go and call an IP enrichment tool, and it will pull in all that information about autonomous system names and ISPs and data centers and all that good stuff that you want from an analyst. And so all of that is kind of automatically done without anyone ever looking at it, and it builds all of that together. It will reflect on its outputs, and then it will show you, hey, here's a response or remediation action end to end, right? A quick template for you. And so what we thought we would do is we'd pull on that thread a little bit more, and we'll walk you through, the inputs and outputs at a high level of the response or remediation agent that we're building at Red Canary. And again, that's so that we can start to automate these tasks so that our analysts internally have the ability to trigger these things and get better at what they do and also learn on the job, right? A lot of this output that comes out of these, if you're a new analyst, you might not be an expert in some of these areas. The foundational knowledge built into these tools actually allows you to I didn't realize that that's the way you could a conditional access policy was used, or I didn't realize that a storage group was accessed in such a way and I should have cleaned up, right? So this is kind of how it works at a high level. So in this scenario here, we're going to do a one-click workflow for a response action. So a SOC analyst gets a threat. Let's say that it's an Azure cloud threat. And there's multiple steps that we've detected in this intrusion, starting by an API key being compromised. And so, our analysts will review all those activities. They will start to sort of accumulate all of those activities in a threat timeline. They might add annotations to that. And then when we get to this step, we're okay, we need to add some response remediation actions for our customer or for one of our own internal team members to take action on this. So classically, right, you'd have to walk through that threat. Maybe you have some templates that you can quickly map over to it. But things are pretty dynamic, right, in the cloud. And there's thousands and thousands of different cloud operations that can be made. And so that's a pretty monotonous task of maintaining templates and understanding hotkeys and things. But what if you could click a button, right? And in 30-ish seconds, you have a template pretty much automatically created that has all of your response remediation action workflows sort of already worked for you. So that's what we'll work through now. So let me explain this slide a little bit, because you're only seeing one half of the picture. But in this, what's happened is we've done a simulated attack in a Microsoft Azure instance. And it started off by, like I said, an identity being compromised. And then when the attacker went in, they did some storage blob enumeration. They modified some security groups to give them persistence. They enumerated a key in a key vault. They invited an external user to this instance, to a Gmail, and a Gmail, very, very bad. And then they've modified some conditional access policies, again, to give them persistent access and bypass MFA, right? These are actually all, tactics, techniques, and procedures that we see, with actors like Scattered Spider, who are very active in cloud native attacks these days. And so what you're seeing here is just a snippet from the threat timeline, but you can see that a resource create action was taken, a security group was modified to allow an IP address in there. You can see the details in the comment with the JSON actions that were taken specifically. And so an analyst would then click a button and out spits that right-hand column. And you can see here that it has the user that was impacted. It has all the forensics details around the IP that was, involved. It has the storage account involved. It has the security group name that was impacted, the secret that was accessed, the actual email address that was used to give external access to it, and then finally the name of the conditional access policy that was impacted. And then you get this really nice summary of these response or remediation actions, and it walks you through exactly what you should do and what you should check on for each one of these things. And so this was all done, with GPT-4. These models have a ton of foundational knowledge. And so, what we did in the background here with that agent from the previous slide is, we went and grabbed that threat and we did some contextual prompt engineering and some retrieval augmented generation and presented all of that data. And this is what spits out the other side, right? So now I have a contextually, dynamically built response remediation plan exactly for this threat. And so this is available for our analysts to modify. It's just in simple markdown. And so what would happen hypothetically, and you can see here in the red underline, and this is a super important piece of advice to give you, is that if you're bringing generative AI into a security operations center, you need to have humans in the loop. You cannot let this stuff run amok or just implicitly trust it. And so you have to have humans in the loop validating this stuff. And so what you see here in red is the generative AI, didn't say hallucinate, but I think it kind of waffled, right? Because it's like, well, no, I shouldn't check the security policy. I should just delete that. Like we need to give very explicit and clear advice, right, for these response and remediation actions. And so what we'll do is we'll go in and modify some of those words, tweak it slightly, but you can see 95, 98+% of that template was done. We just verified it for accuracy, changed a few of the words. And then what our customers see on the timeline is a comment just like this, with the markdown syntax highlighting, your response remediation actions, and then a nice little blurb at the end to say, hey, just reach out to us if you have questions or if you need help. And so I hope that this is like a pretty tangible example of kind of how you can how these efficiencies manifest themselves end to end from, a compromise or a workflow you might have in your SOC, some of the tools sprinkled in, and then the outputs of it. And so to orient ourselves back to that, agent architecture overview, when we click that button, there was no manual chat boxes or anything like that. It was, you clicked a button, it invoked our response remediation action agent inside of Red Canary Copilot, and that then reasoned and figured out that it needed to use certain tools that it had available to go grab the timeline context of that threat. That's that retrieval augmented generation. It saw IP addresses in there, so it would enrich them and give you that extra context. It saw timeline annotation, so it went and grabbed that data. And finally, it outputs that nice, concise response or remediation plan for you to see. And so this is how you realize those efficiencies. And it starts with just super simple prompt engineering, like we talked about in those alert summaries. And it evolves and matures into these chaining of prompts one after another, right, through this agent architecture to automate tasks. And so this is not unique to Red Canary. Microsoft Copilot for Security is built on top of this agent architecture. It's actually the architecture that they use is open source. If you go look on GitHub for Microsoft Semantic Kernel, that's the whole sort of back end of how they're building that tool. And you'll also see this type of construct manifest itself in all of the SaaS apps that we use, right? Like we see it internally in Jira and Confluence. You'll see it in Outlook. You'll see it in Office 365. This concept, this agent concept is here to stay, and it's how you're going to realize efficiency gains and automation gains, not only in the SOC, but across other facets of your business. And so to wrap things up, I wanted to wrap things up on three things. So when you're working with generative AI and you want to apply it to solve problems, you need to have clear goals. You need to set clear, measurable goals. If you don't do that, and you can't show the business what you're working on or how it's improving things, right? We have a rule of thumb here that if we introduce new tools or processes into our security operations workflows, they cannot impede productivity. That's rule 0. Do not make things worse, right? Obviously. But then we also we'll measure them on 3 axes: accurate, complete, and timeliness. How is generative AI helping on one of those 3 things? That's our big pillar. So you have to be able to measure these things to show the value. The second thing is you need to have high quality data to prompt these models, to train these models, right? So that means that your workflows in past cases and past investigations, that's a gold mine for you to use in prompt engineering and agent engineering and coding your workflows based on that high quality data. In data science world, garbage in, garbage out. And so a lot of folks will say, yeah, but generative AI hallucinates. You're right, it absolutely does. But one of the number one reasons why it does that is because when the generative AI is prompted, there is lack of context. You're asking very vague questions with no background, with no explanation on why, and expecting it to perform miracles, right? And so when you apply generative AI to narrow problems with the right context, with the right data, and the right prompting, you will have much higher accuracy outputs from those tools. And we are realizing that today. And I promise you will too. And then finally, you need to have experts in the loop. It's one thing that we're learning, and we're also attending conferences and webinars and things, and this one theme keeps coming up. Humans are critical decision makers because we have intuition, creativity, experience, decision making. We're that system 2 thinker, right? And so you need to always complement generative AI outputs with a human, especially early on right now in these early days of generative AI adoption. You will have much higher success when you have that human machine teaming concept working in your favor. And a great example of that is if you look at the output of generative AI tools, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, name your tool, there's always that disclaimer at the bottom, right? That says, check this output, AI can make mistakes, right? And it's very true. And that's why it's so important right now in these early days to make sure you have that human element to couple your tools. And so that wraps things up for our webinar. And so we're going to wrap things up with one more poll. And this is something that, I always love to get a poll from the audience. But, before today, how familiar were you with the application of generative AI into security operations, right? And I really hope that this has opened your eyes to this technology and how you can surgically apply it to certain scenarios with a few of the examples that we've shared in the short time that we've had, and what sort of outcomes you can get. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. And please check our website. We have tons of good content on there. Our blog has some great generative AI content. We also just released our threat detection report for this year. And inside that threat detection report, a few of us wrote an AI trend in there talking about how adversaries will use AI and how defenders will use AI, and some of the pros and cons that we predict might happen throughout this year. A shocker, we think that defenders are going to have the upper hand in using these tools for many reasons, but one, of course, is there's so many expert data scientists out there, and formally trained security engineers and practitioners that far outweigh the resources that adversaries have. And yeah, they're going to use it to do stuff, but personally, I think this is a technology that is going to give defenders the upper hand and allow us to scale at the speed and the data at which we're forced to go through. So yeah, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll open it up for questions. Let me see here. I'm just reading through a couple of these to find a good one. So here's a good one from someone. How do you manage a trustworthy walled garden while using customer data with an Azure OpenAI? Because I referenced GPT-4 and GPT 3.5. It's a great question. Much like our cloud security providers, whether it's Microsoft, Google, AWS, right? When you use those services and when you run workloads in those providers, you trust them that their employees aren't doing nefarious things with your data in S3 or your EC2 instances or Lambda functions. Like, that's all trusted. And so yes, we use Azure OpenAI for our foundational models, and we've been starting to experiment with some of them in AWS. But Microsoft's terms of service, as well as a lot of the other cloud providers, clearly state that they do not use that data to train any models. It's kept specifically for you in your instance. And what actually is really nice about Azure when you use their products, I promise you I'm not trying to sell you on them, you actually deploy your own endpoint. So you pick your models and you deploy your own unique endpoint for you to use. And then you can even opt out of some of the like the AI filtering that they do to look for like prompt injection and that sort of stuff. But yes, so you're covered under the terms from what these SaaS providers typically have with all of the other services. The other way, if you're completely tinfoil hat, you can totally run these models through like a self-hosted tool. Amazon has, and both Azure and Amazon have good tools to do this. So you can run open source models like Llama or Mixtral. But again, the accuracy of these models is nowhere near as good as these closed source models from OpenAI or Anthropic. Let me see here. There's a question: is Red Canary implementing generative AI to give us analysis and easy to read summary and playbook steps for remediation within the dashboard? Good question. Yeah, so we're actively working on bringing Red Canary Copilot features to our customers. And the first places you'll probably see it is, with the events and alerts that we triage in the states that we set. So giving you an explanation of why something might be marked as not a threat or something is marked as suspicious. And we'll give you all of the investigation steps that we took to do that. And we'll even give you, all of the data, as I like to call it internally. We'll show you the receipts on why these investigations happened. But for the person that asked that, we would please reach out to your Red Canary reps. We would love feedback and ways to use generative AI on our product. And so we're very open, and we can really quickly take these into account and work them into our workflows. There was a good question here. Can you please provide your perspective of using Microsoft Copilot for security and how it will be useful for organization security departments? Yeah, so we've been part of the Microsoft Copilot for security private preview for several months now. It's a really strong tool. It's fully integrated with their product suite. I like to think of it as like a chat GPT, but specifically built for cybersecurity. It's pretty amazing with the natural language to KQL, It's able to reach right into your instance and pull data. So Red Canary, we've built a plugin that you'll be able to install as part of that, and it will reach into our platform and pull of all of our threat information and our detector details and intelligence details, and you'll be able to add that in context. And so essentially, where I think it will be useful is where you typically go to like a dashboard and look at alerts. You can do that and click on things, and it's going to automatically start summarizing and whatnot. But then in the Copilot portion of it, you can say, hey, tell me more about Microsoft Sentinel incident 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it will go out and pull that. And you'd be like, tell me more about the risk of this user. And it will go out and query that. And so you can start to do security investigations with natural language and not have to be an expert in all the different query languages or all the different security tools that are out there. And so it does a really good job of bridging that gap of natural language investigations and lowering the bar for security analysts that might be newer. Let's see. There's another one. I've been learning about AI hallucinations. Can you describe that and why it is a risk, and how do you resolve it? It's a really good question. I think I touched upon it a little bit, but I don't think you ever resolve it. To be honest, it's always going to be a risk. But the way that you mitigate for those risks, like I was saying, is you need to, when you're doing the prompting or whatever the task is that you're asking the generative AI, make sure that you're not giving it these really big problems, right? Break that problem down into really narrow questions. So that's like the first place to start. The second place to start is using more of the stronger models like GPT-4 and Claude 3. Those will limit hallucinations. Using some of the features inside of like OpenAI's tools, like function calling. It's an advanced topic. And using things like seeds to help with the randomization, that helps. And using things like retrieval augmented generation, where you're going out and so if you ask a question about a certain type of data, you're actually going out and doing those queries behind the scenes and pulling that data in so that the AI isn't just making that up. You're giving it the actual data to answer the question with, and you might even seed the answer to it. And really all the AI is doing is summarizing all of that for you. And so there's a few techniques to do it, but you'll never, at least right now, there's no way to completely eliminate it. Let's see. Here's another good question. Are there prohibitive guardrails in Copilot for security compared to normal Copilot? Specifically, do results get blocked in some cases where the output is considered malicious? I don't have a holistic answer to that, so I can't speak complete to everything. Just because we've only used, the security Copilot, Copilot for security, I should say. But I hadn't run into any on that tool. I think it's because Microsoft probably has more guardrails that they've built internally, knowing that it's built specifically for cybersecurity. With all of that being said, yes, I've run into all kinds of stuff with the Azure OpenAI models, the raw models, where I feed it a PowerShell script and tell it to deobfuscate it, and it will spit back, "I'm sorry, as a large language model, I can't do malicious, adversarial things," and you start a prompt war with it to try to get through it. But I haven't experienced any roadblockers, but my testing certainly is super comprehensive. Let me see. Let me get a couple more questions that are in here, and then I'll wrap things up. So there's one here around where do you see the most impact with agents? I think that's a tough one to answer in totality, but like I was alluding to, if you have data retrieval tasks or tasks where you need to, like, you typically go search the internet or go search, knowledge bases, that is where AI you will see immediate gain from AI agents. With the retrieval augmented generation, like we've built some internal like FAQ tools and things, and it's incredible when you encode that data and you give it access to a model, these models are hungry for knowledge, right? And so when you give this model and say, hey, you can access this tool that has, when you need to query customer support questions, go reach into this database. So then when someone says, hey, I have a question about how to configure automate actions in Red Canary, it would say, oh, they're asking for a help article. I'm going to go call the help article tool. And then that agent will go search for, automate actions. It'll find the closest match, and it will bring that context back to you, right? And so you can see how things like search will get upended by these agent tools. But I also see them, having other impacts where you can we will be able to automate large portions of cybersecurity workflows with custom built agents. That is absolutely, by the end of the year, companies, including Red Canary, will be able to do those sort of things. All right, one more, and then I will wrap it up. Let's see here. Here's a good one. What ongoing maintenance and tuning is required to keep generative AI systems effective? This is a $1 million question. We are still figuring that out, tongue in cheek. But so a couple of things. So I cannot stress enough how important unit testing is when doing generative AI research and development. Like I said, these models are stochastic. And so you could feed it the same question 10 times and get different answers. And so how do you build unit tests around knowing that, like, all right, so I've changed my model or I've changed my prompt, what level of quality you expect from the output, right? And so this is an evolving area of research. No one has really cracked the egg on this, but you're fighting fire with fire. Honestly, you're using generative AI to help grade the output of some of these, and you can actually use natural language processing models. There's frameworks out there. So traditional NLP, deep learning, to check the output and the language used. But to be honest, at least from the research I've read and with my coworkers, even those are falling short. And so internally, we use like a set of common threats that we see where we know the right annotations and things that we expect to see. And we have like expected outputs and keywords that we would want to see in those outputs. And so, just at the end of this month, a bunch of models in Azure OpenAI are getting deprecated, right? And so we have to upgrade to the newer models. So just like in classical ML, models have a shelf life, and you have to constantly keep them updated and make sure that your prompts all work the right way. And so, yeah, my advice would be just make sure you have really good unit testing. Don't skip that step. It's really easy to prototype generative AI solutions. It's really hard to make robust enterprise grade solutions without really good testing in place. So I will leave you at that. Again, thank you so much for attending today. It's always fun geeking out and sharing this stuff, especially in this evolving world of generative AI. And stay tuned for more fun generative AI content and technologies to come out of Red Canary. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.